Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to all of you to the Wild Center tonight. I'm Stephanie Ratcliffe, the Executive Director, and we are so glad you are here tonight. When we built this museum, we deliberately made it a place to convene around issues that are important to science and society. The SAVE Winter Conference, as part of the World University Games, exists at this pivotal intersection, and we are so honored to be hosting the event tonight. The Wild Center's mission is to ignite an enduring passion for the Adirondacks, where people and nature can thrive together and offer an example for the world. We believe that an enduring love of nature can inspire action on climate change and will help ensure a thriving world for all of us. We all know the science, and we know that the winters are warming in the Adirondacks, threatening our winter culture and our way of life and the special ecosystems that exist here. Saving winter for us means not only shining a light on the impacts of climate change, but also elevating what we can all do together to implement climate solutions. To that end, we recently opened a new exhibit titled Climate Solutions. I hope you explore the exhibit this evening. It's on the way to the Otters. With the intent of making climate solutions visible and empowering people to find their own place in the climate movement through personal stories of people right here in the Adirondacks making a difference. Tonight, you're going to hear stories of some of these people and are working on the front lines of climate change. So again, thank you for coming tonight, and now I'm going to introduce Jen Kretzer, the Wild Center's Director of Climate Initiatives.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for being here this evening. Over the past 15 years, I've had the great privilege of developing the museum's youth climate program, which engages young people in learning about climate change science, impacts, justice, and solutions. Back in 2009, when we hosted our Youth Climate Summit, our very first one right here in this room at the Wild Center, summits bring together young people around climate solutions and inspire them to take action in their schools and communities. At our Adirondack Youth Climate Summit, many young people are motivated because they deeply value our winter culture and they participate in winter sports of all kinds, from ice fishing to snowmobiling, from ski jumping to luge, and they see the impacts of climate change happening right outside their door in their lifetimes. Since 2009, I'm proud to say we have inspired and catalyzed over 150 youth climate summits all over the world, including 24 in US states and in 9 countries. Our summit network continues to grow each year, increasing global climate education literacy and igniting youth participation and leadership in climate solutions. From the Adirondacks to Pakistan, from Maryland to Sri Lanka. One of our core values is to create summits that are responsive to and grounded in the place where they're held. By understanding the climate impacts where they live, youth can create care and action for their own community. So whether a summit takes place in California or Canada or Bermuda, youth are learning and connecting to climate science, justice, and solutions directly relevant to their lives. We know that education is absolutely essential to solving the climate crisis. We are finding new ways of educating and engaging children, youth, adults in climate solutions by unleashing the power and creativity of educators, teachers, and youth to develop and implement climate action projects right in their homes, schools, and communities. The power of youth is undeniable. The world is home to 1.8 billion young people between the ages of 10 to 24, the largest generation of youth in history. Young people are increasingly aware of the challenges and risks presented by the climate crisis and have the opportunity to implement those solutions. Young people are valuable contributors to climate action. They are agents of change, entrepreneurs and innovators, whether through education, science, or technology. Youth leaders are scaling up their efforts and using their skills to accelerate climate action. Young people's unprecedented mobilization around the world shows the massive power they possess to hold decision makers accountable. Their message is clear. The older generation has failed, and it is the young who will pay in full with their very futures. But this is an intergenerational effort, not just one to hand off to the younger generation, but a really, really amazing opportunity, an unprecedented opportunity for us to join in and create change. As showcased in our Climate Solutions exhibit, everyone has a role in solving the climate crisis. Tonight, we elevate the contributions of young people and Indigenous communities who are already implementing climate solutions in the Adirondacks and beyond. And I encourage you to listen closely to their perspectives and consider how you can collaborate and learn from these groups in your own communities, wherever you are in the world. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker. We're going to hear from one of our youth climate leaders, Bella Whistler from Saranac Lake. And Bella, why don't you come on up? Thank you very much, everyone.
Hi, everybody. My name is Bella Whistler. I am a senior at Northwood School. I am a NICEF biathlete and Nordic ski racer. And I have been working with the Wild Center's Youth Climate Program for about 4 years now. And this is why I want to save winter. So growing up in Saranac Lake, there's such a large winter culture there. Specifically with the Winter Carnival that we have every year, it brings hundreds of people into Saranac Lake to celebrate winter. And one of the largest aspects of that is the Ice Palace. And growing up, I can see a change in the Ice Palace every year as our winter is warm. The Ice Palace is getting smaller, and in the most recent years, you can see that the Ice Palace is only staying frozen for about a week or two until it begins to melt and they end up having to take it down. And growing up as an athlete in Lake Placid, there's such a large winter sports and Olympic culture there, and growing up being able to try out so many different Olympic sports and meeting so many different Olympians at a pretty young age was a really unique and amazing experience. Growing up here, I have so many childhood memories based around winter, going sledding, playing in the snow, and during the holidays when my family would come up and visit, and we'd all go skiing together. My family kind of introduced me to the climate crisis and why I became so passionate about it. My grandfather was the chairman of the APA for several years, the Adirondack Park Agency, and my dad works as a natural resource science teacher in Saranac Lake. And I have a very vivid memory of being around the age 8 after learning about climate change and how it was impacting the place that I love most, Saranac Lake and Lake Placid, and just being up all night worrying and crying about how I thought I was going to lose the place that I loved and I had no power over it. And now at the age of 17, seeing these impacts of billions of people around the world and how it's impacting so many different communities. The impact of climate change on my sport. So I am a full-time athlete now with NICEF, and I'm seeing these impacts impact my sporting. And we're seeing so many race cancellations in the recent years with these really warm winters. We're only able to ski at venues that are able to make snow, like Mount Van Hoevenberg and Gore Mountain. And we're seeing very on and off skiing with seeing natural snow for a week or so until it thaws out and we're back on the man-made loops. Speaking of race cancellations, where's Sophia? My teammate Sophia was supposed to be here with me tonight, but just last week we had a race canceled because it was so warm that Gore Mountain couldn't even make enough snow to hold a race. So she had to travel up to Maine this weekend to compete in a race to qualify for junior nationals in the spring. So the climate impacts of my sport. Not only us athletes were being impacted by the climate crisis, we're also impacting this change. We're seeing this cycle of losing our natural and local snow. So we're traveling and kind of chasing snow around the country and the globe, emitting so much from traveling, or staying local and using all this energy and power to create man-made snow, which is only adding to our snow loss every year. What does the future look like? It's scary. It's scary to think about, especially for me. I see winter as a place of joy and hobbies and passions and brings a bunch of people together. And it's scary to think about a future without winter, or a place where you can only find it in finite places. Where I'm going. Next year, I'm heading to Middlebury College, class of 2027.5, and I'm hoping to study environmental science because I want to dedicate my life to addressing these problems that impact everybody in the world. And I also am planning on skiing on their Club Nordic team, where I hope to have the ability to train and compete on real natural snow. It's time to act. I kind of have a call of action to you guys. I'm asking you all to take a step back and look at the consequences of the climate crisis on not only our winters, but the whole globe, and pull your weight. It's time for all of us to act, and we have the solutions. We need to listen to youth and the marginalized voices in your community and around the planet, and together we can all create change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bella. I now would like to introduce Neil Patterson. He's our keynote speaker for this evening. Neil Patterson Jr. was born into the White Bear Clan as a citizen of Tuscarora Nation. He is the Associate Director of the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment at SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry in Central New York. Neil founded the Tuscarora Environmental Program in 1997 through the assistance of the Haudenosaunee Environmental Task Force. You might, if you had a chance to visit Solutions, you might recognize Neil from his portrait in the Climate Solutions exhibition, for which he was an advisor on, and also for our Ways of Knowing project, where we worked in partnership with the Haudenosaunee community to create the Thanksgiving Address exhibit as part of our museum experience. I am deeply thankful to Neil for helping us understand the role of traditional ecological knowledge and how gratitude for the earth as both a core value and a starting point to addressing the climate crisis and finding resilience not only within ourselves, but also in our communities to help us thrive in the future. Please welcome my friend and one of the most amazing people I've ever met, Neil Patterson. Thank you so much.
I just realized I was an advisor on an exhibit that featured my portrait. And I did advise against that, but you'll have to see that for yourself. I'd like to introduce myself in my own language. So I always begin because my mother told me to do this, and so I continue to do this. So I would say, "Chwant oskinahe, gyasa dekwadia, disna waknane, skaruda, ekwahawik ayadakra, egisa seta dirachaks, disna wagyutna, skaruda afnawet da udaya, disna wagana harata hot twa ekwa, disna ekwahawa, yagwatnaka." So welcome to Haudenosaunee and Wabanaki territory. Those of you who attended the opening ceremony might have had a chance to see a little bit of a land acknowledgement, which some of you, I'm sure, are all experiencing in different ways, in different forms, across the Adirondacks, across Turtle Island, perhaps even in your part of the world. Folks are thinking about the role that Indigenous people have and are playing with respect to climate change. This is a photograph of a ceremony, a photograph taken shortly after a ceremony at the Onondaga Longhouse. And I use it to to have folks in the room imagine that you've entered Haudenosaunee territory a long time ago. And I think it's appropriate for this gathering of people here to imagine the original land acknowledgement that would have existed here in Haudenosaunee territory. What would have happened is you all, as guests coming from all parts of the world, would have arrived at a place called the Wood's Edge. It is a metaphorical space in Haudenosaunee thought and practice of a clearing where your instruction as a visitor is to build a small fire. And that fire would signify to the original people of Haudenosaunee territory that some visitors have arrived. And so it is our job as Haudenosaunee people to greet you and to honor and to pay our respects for visitors. And the first thing that we acknowledge is that there's a lot of dust that is built up on your clothes and your body. And so it is our job to, what we call, sort of share these words of encouragement to you. Because when folks experience a loss of some kind, this is what I've been thinking about just coming down from Whiteface Mountain, from the women's slalom event earlier today. When folks lose something, the first thing that happens is they begin to experience changes in their body, actually. And some of you have all gone through this at times in your life. And what happens is you begin to develop a lump in your throat, a little bit of tears in your eyes, your body gets tired. And this is what happens while people travel. And in the old days, what we would do is actually remove the thorns from your skin, from your clothing, from all of the gear that you've brought here. This ceremony is actually called condolence, and it's a ceremony that still goes on today in upstate New York. And this is a picture of that ceremony where our women, who are our clan mothers, have given the instruction to our men to be able to do this for visitors who come to Haudenosaunee territory. And we would offer wampum. We would offer words of encouragement and love and peace. Because we know, as you sit here in this room, your minds are elsewhere. You're thinking of all of the people back home and the communities back home that you left to be here together with everyone. And so we acknowledge that. Anytime Haudenosaunee people gather, we acknowledge this, what we call 3 bare words. We acknowledge that you've become dirty from the flight, and maybe it's that TSA checkpoint you all had to deal with on the way here in LaGuardia or JFK or something. But you've accrued this sort of travel slime, if you will, and it's important to recognize that. We also know that there are tears often when you leave your community, when you leave your kids, leave your sisters, your uncles, and your grandparents behind. And we would say, take this soft skin of a deer and wipe your eyes so that you can see clearer. We also know that when folks face a loss, they are unable to talk. And if you think about what happens when you go through this sort of grieving process, that's the last thing to come back to you. You're often inside your own head for a long time, and it's hard to communicate with each other. So our job is to go to that small stream and spring and dip a cup. Move that cup downstream with the current of the water and provide a cold glass of water for you to clear your throat so that you can communicate again with each other. This is a very, very old practice in Haudenosaunee territory. In fact, Haudenosaunee people, there are many records of us condoling Jesuit priests who came here to this land in the 1600s. There are still examples, and I was fortunate enough to be one at a few days ago at this very same longhouse, where we were able to offer these words of encouragement to folks at the State Department of Environmental Conservation, who have also seen this loss, not only in their personal lives, but in their professional lives. Those of you, like our previous speaker, working to save winter, we've seen these losses, right? And it's a grieving process that folks are going through, that we need to lift each other up. So it's really exciting today for you all to come to Lake Placid and to hear an acknowledgement of this being Kanien'kehá:ka territory, right? The people of the Flint. But this is the original process that we call the 3 bear words. I wanted to share that with you and to give you a sense of time as well, right? I mentioned this is an old practice. This is a timeline that was put together by a colleague of mine, Dr. Landis, who I have the pleasure of working with at SUNY ESF. It is the state's forestry college in Syracuse, New York, in Onondaga territory, in the heart of our Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And what I love about Dr. Landis's work is that very far left of this timeline, she didn't say humans appear, that humans return. Because for Haudenosaunee people, if you ask them, how long have they been in the Adirondacks? They will say from the beginning. They will say from time immemorial. And it's been fascinating to follow the work of anthropologists today all across North America. And every time the date of indigenous lifeways and culture in North America is being rediscovered as older. Every single time we see today, we see that our original oral histories of our place in this planet, this continent we call Turtle Island, goes much further back than maybe the old Bering Land Strait theory you guys all learned in school at some point in time. We have long relationships with these places, and this is a great project by our Kanien'kehá:ka brothers and sisters to rename the places of the Adirondacks. So many of you probably have wondered, where does this name come from, Adirondack? Who knows where Adirondack comes from? I know you're probably all afraid to repeat what you've been told, but when you ask Kanien'kehá:ka people, they say it's very simple. You know, there are these elaborate stories about indigenous people scraping a meager living off the land here in these acidic, shallow soils with, very short growing seasons, and saying the people there, they had to eat bark. They had to scrape the bark off of trees to survive. It was a scary place of survival. No one ventured to the Adirondacks. But when you talk to the Mohawks, they say, this is where our brother Adolunda, this is where the Adolunda live. Adolunda, is a very simple translation, means they eat bark. But it's not talking about human beings, it's talking about the porcupine. And so this is the place of the porcupine. And if you look at this map, you will find an elaborate indigenous language system that describes a relationship between people, our relatives, and the place where we're standing today. I grew up in a place that today I suppose folks call Buffalo, New York. Go Bills, by the way. Go Bills. Buffalo, New York, right? What does that mean, Buffalo? And so people say, well, there must have been buffalo here. Well, there was eastern woodland bison roaming here for sure. We know that to be true. Where does buffalo come from? It's very curious to me. And when you talk to Onondaga people, the people of the Seneca, the people of the Great Hill, which is located not far from Canandaigua Lake, you will hear them say, it's not called buffalo, it's called Desiohwe. And Desiohwe means the place of the basswood tree. And so it's been my real honor and pleasure and just all around great thanksgiving to the teachers that have shared a lot of this language with me. And I've entered into my own language journey, as you heard me in my introduction, really kind of being forced on by my mom at the time. But she recognized that it was a dying language. And 3 years ago, the last fluent speaker of the Tuscarora language passed away. He was 84 years old, and luckily, as a young person, we all had the opportunity to work with him and to think about these place names, to think about the relationships that indigenous people cultivated for thousands of years here, and the knowledge about how they did it sustainably. They did it sustainably because of this essential treaty, not only among the people and between the people of Haudenosaunee territory, but between the Wabanaki people themselves, between people who did not dress or speak like us. And we said this park, this land, this river, this tree, this wetland, all of this is represented in this dish with one spoon. And it is our job as human beings to share that dish with one spoon. So imagine if we got together after doing this 3 Bear Words and you're feeling uplifted, and now we would all gather around a large kettle and we'd all have to eat with one spoon, right? That is the metaphor that's talking about what we know today as systems ecology, as sustainability, as regenerative systems, right? And the painting here is depicting an animal we call jutnaka, that is the beaver. And it's our job to eat the tail of this beaver from this dish with one spoon. And if you ask my family, they will tell you it's very hard to eat beaver tail with a spoon. It takes a lot of cooperation. And it takes an eye for how much do I need and how much do others in the room need. Something I think Eleanor Ostrom, aspires to in her work around common pooled resources, right? How do we share the ocean? How do we share the St. Lawrence River? How do we share the Adirondack Park? It's all built into this very old climate solution called the dish with one spoon. This is a little bit more of a breakdown of that dish, and it's really exciting to talk to you today because we are approaching, on the right side of this diagram, a ceremony that gives thanks for a very important tree of this place. And in fact, you could also say, like the director, I suppose, that I work with, Dr. Robin Kimmerer, has written about, that we are actually citizens of Maple Nation. We are citizens of the Seed Nation. We are citizens of our grandfather Thunderer Nation. When we hear Ratiwealos, when we hear those thunderers come, we are all citizens of Thunder Nation. And very soon we will begin our renewal for the new year in all of our communities, and we will recite the songs and the speeches and the dances that go with every one of these ceremonies. This is a very old relationship that's embedded and encoded in our language around these ceremonies. It's our cultural lifeways. And so when you take a drink of sap, like my kids are here, who are in the third row over here, been up on the mountain with me in the snow this past couple of days. When you take a drink of that sap, and I encourage you, anybody ever get a chance to drink sap? Oh man, you guys are missing out. You gotta drink sap. Forget the syrup. Set that aside, set the candy aside, set the cotton candy and jams and jellies aside for a moment, and tap a tree and feel that water is drawn through the tiniest, porous, smallest spaces through osmosis. And think about the fact that it's winter that does that. That we need winter. That we actually ingest winter through that sap. So when we think about the loss of winter, for Haudenosaunee people, this is what's at stake. Is a particular lifeway associated with a great honor and thanksgiving and greeting of winter. Because I don't think there's one culture in the world that prays that winter doesn't come. Right? When you look all over Mother Earth, all of our human cultures celebrate the seasons. They say, thank you for what just happened, and we hope it happens again. That's Haudenosaunee religion right there, is not to ask for things, but to give thanks for what has happened. And so when we look at cultures all over the world, nobody is saying, please, please let it be an easy winter. We hope that winter doesn't come. No. All cultures that are based on the land celebrate the coming of winter. And that's what we're going to do in a few days in Haudenosaunee territory. We'll do it with games. And I love this old photograph of, we call it Gadatra. It's the snow snake game. It is a game that requires a long track and snakes that are carved from wood and treated with the most intricate medicines. The fat of muskrat, the oils of trees, the songs and the practices that go along with Gadatra. It's a men's game that's practiced in our community to see how long these snakes can slide across the snow. And in the old days, they would say miles. The tracks were miles long. And today, our men are waiting for this snow. Right now, in all of Haudenosaunee territory, there's probably not one snow snake track that is built as we speak here today, as we sit here today. And normally, these tracks would be abundant in every backyard, young boys practicing to throw these snakes. Hopefully they're not smoking like this guy, but that's parlance of our times there. Shortly after this photograph, many of these men took it upon themselves and said, you know what? We're seeing less and less snow snake tracks. We're seeing less and less men who know the songs and know how to treat snakes and know how to build those tracks. And so they went to Geneva. When I was 2 years old, my uncle went with a delegation of Haudenosaunee chiefs. And the women, it was up to the women really, who said, you have a duty here. You have an obligation to tell the world what's happening now is threatening the future of indigenous people across the planet. And so they went to Geneva for the first time in well over 60 years. And my uncle here in the square Coke bottle glasses there in the middle of the photograph, he told a great story. And I wanted to share that with you a little bit about his travels to Europe. Because this was not the first delegation of Haudenosaunee people to speak to the world. It actually began in the 1920s with a man named Eskaha. He was a Cayuga man. He traveled to the United Nations to talk about the injustices around border crossings at that time. These men decided, What we need to talk about is a basic call to consciousness. That was the byline message of the trip. What is the world's basic call to consciousness? They were fortunate enough to have an elder from Hopi named Thomas Benyanka, who delivered this message to Onondaga back in the 1940s. He said, the basic call to consciousness is about our relationship to the earth. We have to talk about people's relationship to the earth if we're going to stop this ship. No one was talking about climate change at this meeting, but everyone was talking about climate change, whether they knew it or not. 1976. He told a great story of the Haudenosaunee delegation who was welcomed by the mayor of Geneva, because as they flew into the airport, the officials detained them. They said, you cannot fly on your own passport as Haudenosaunee people. You need a United States passport if you're coming into Switzerland. The man in the bow tie on your left was the mayor of Geneva at the time, who remembered meeting Descahe in 1924 when he came to the League of Nations. And he said, I know who the Haudenosaunee people are. I was a young boy when they came. And I talked to this Cayuga chief, and I'm going to let these people in. My Uncle Stuart here in the photo tells this story with great reverence and about the idea that it was human relationships that began our journey in speaking to the world. They talked about the knowledge that was at risk in our communities, about the steep decline in people fishing in particular in our communities, about the steep decline of our people speaking our own language. And we can talk a lot about the climate crisis. I will be honest, it's very hard for Indigenous people to hear the pronoun we talking about the climate crisis. In particular, because Haudenosaunee people, we have 5 different we's. We actually have 52 different pronouns that we use on the fly to talk about our world and our relationship to each other. And so when I speak to my kids and I say, we need to mow the lawn, it's a very specific we. You can do that in Haudenosaunee language. I can mean a we that talks about you and I here together now, but I can also talk about we as a humanity going back to creation, as a human species. That's also a we in our language as well. There is no accident why this fact is true. And this is slowly coming out on a global scale. We are working with a number of partners who are finally recognizing that cultural and linguistic diversity protect the natural world. When you protect the language, when you protect the ability of our community to harvest that sap and ingest it into our bodies, you are protecting the natural world from a Haudenosaunee perspective. It's been a great pleasure to work with the Wild Center over the years and all of our partners, including Kurt Stager here, Jen and Stephanie and all the staff here, all of the great people who work at the Wild Center to bring youth to the Adirondacks. I had looked for a long time for a photograph in my family's albums. When I was 6 years old, so it was 1980, I came to the Adirondack Park for the first time. And my father drove us straight to Onchioto, New York, which is not far from here. We sat down with a really old man named Ray Fadden, and he introduced us to his porcupine. He talked about the bears that would break into his cabin all the time. It turned out that Ray Fadden had been doing this his whole life too. He had been reacquainting and rebuilding relationships between Haudenosaunee people and their original homelands. And it's just so fabulous to see his grandson now doing the same thing here at the Wild Center. It's a wonderful program the Wild Center has in honoring and educating folks about Indigenous sovereignty, Indigenous lifeways, Indigenous resurgence, right? That's a word that we use in our community. We're not seeking simply to say, we are still here. We can leave that one behind for now. We're talking about we're surviving and thriving now. That's where we need our own schools. We need our own way of life in our communities that breaks free from the chains of colonialism. This was the first trip to the Adirondacks as a miniature Ray Fadden, if you will, as a Ray Fadden groupie. I was able to hike around the High Falls Loop on the Oswegatchie River. And as you can see, the kids had mixed reviews. Some enjoyed it, some did not. We did about 30 miles. There was a lot of pain, and there was a lot of hard work. And I think that's what we hear in our travels among Indigenous communities. You know, today there's this very fancy, trendy term called traditional ecological knowledge. I actually teach a course on it at ESF to students every fall. And it's funny because when I go home, they say, Neil, what do you do at ESF? And I say, well, I teach this course. And, oh, what's the course? And it's called traditional ecological knowledge. You know, they're like, what are you talking about? Those are the people that have the knowledge that I'm talking to. But when you talk to them, what they say is it's a way of life. This is about a belief system and a way of life. It's not about some small fact about what plant cures what that's hidden deep in the brain of an elder in our community. It's a way of life. It's a complex of belief, practice, and knowledge together. You have to live this. And these guys paid the price for living it. We were able to do some really interesting Adirondack trips, which actually pushed the boundaries of what the state says you can and can't do on our territory. Things like ice fishing, things like building a fire, things like taking more than 8 people in a group. Lots of interesting adventures we've had in negotiating the colonial constructs that are on Haudenosaunee homelands today. And so I'll just end with a quote from John Mohawk, and I think he sums it up so very well in this quote. What our job is to step into these cycles and read this place as you would a poem. It is not our job to pass laws, to create restrictions, to keep people honest. It is our job to show our happiness and our love for creation, to be able to step into those cycles as much as we can. And that's what you're all doing here today, because I've been here in January and there's nobody here any other year. So you're stepping into those cycles right now, right? When you step out that door, you're stepping into that cycle. Those blood vessels constrict, that's part of that belief, that's part of that practice. And you know for sure that that maple is also doing its duty. As you walk by those maples, they're continuing to uphold their responsibility. And so this is what we're asking from our leaders, from the folks traveling the world. Step into those cycles as much as you can. Be there for it. Be full and present and breathe it in. And I hope you're able to do that while you're here in Haudenosaunee and Wabanaki homelands. So that's what I have prepared for tonight. I'd love to take some questions or hear some thoughts or or reactions. So I appreciate it. So Nyawa.